The bakery on Linden Row had not yet turned on its sign, and the rain that had fallen all night still clung to the awnings like something the morning had forgotten to take down. Inside, near the small round table by the window, a 4-year-old girl was eating a piece of bread the wrong way, picking off the crust first. "Mama," the little girl said quietly, "are we hiding from the man in the picture again today?" The woman at the table did not move. Her tea sat between her hands, untouched, the steam already gone. She had heard the question before, but never like this. Never on a morning where the sun had not yet decided whether to come up. The girl looked at her mother with the patience of a child who had learned that some questions had to be asked twice. "Mama, the man with the silver ring, the one in your old phone, he's standing outside." Across the street, in the doorway of a closed flower shop, a man in a black overcoat had stopped walking. He had been walking past the bakery on his way to a meeting that no longer mattered. But he had glanced through the window, and what he had seen had stopped him so completely that the umbrella in his hand had begun to drip onto his shoe, and he had not noticed. 5 years. 5 years he had been told she was dead. And now she was sitting in a bakery on Linden Row drinking a cup of tea that was no longer warm, with a child whose hair was the same dark brown as his own. Linden Row was the kind of street that had survived 3 different versions of the city without ever being remembered by any of them. It sat in the older quarter of West Haven, between the river and the railway, where the buildings were short and the windows were narrow, and the cobblestones had been paved over so many times that you could feel the bones of the old road through the soles of your shoes. The bakery was called Ottilie's, named for a woman who had owned it 60 years ago and whose photograph still hung above the register, faded into a gray rectangle that no one looked at. The current owner was a man named Pavel Brennick, who came in at 4 every morning to start the ovens and went home at noon to sleep, and who had hired the woman by the window 11 months ago without asking too many questions, because he had learned in his own life that questions were sometimes the wrong currency. The morning rain had left the street smelling of wet stone and yeast and something faintly metallic, the smell of old neighborhoods after the first cold night of autumn. The sky above the rooftops was the color of paper that had been left out in the weather, and the few people who passed the bakery window did so with their collars turned up and their shoulders pulled close, as if the cold were a private thing they were carrying. Inside, the bakery was warm in a way that only places with bread ovens are warm, the heat soft and yeasted and slightly damp, settling into the corners of the room like a sleeping animal. A chalkboard near the door listed the day's offerings in handwriting that leaned slightly to the left. The woman by the window had chosen this bakery, and this table, and this town, for reasons that had nothing to do with bread. She had chosen Linden Row because it was nowhere, because the rents were low, and the questions were few, and the people on the street walked past each other without looking up. She had chosen it because it was the kind of place where a woman could disappear, and where a child could grow up without ever being asked who her father was. For 3 years and 8 months, the choice had held. The street had kept its quiet. The bakery had stayed warm. The girl had grown. And now, on a Tuesday morning in late October, with the rain not yet finished and the sign not yet lit, a man in a black overcoat had stopped walking on the other side of the road, and Linden Row was about to remember that no street stays forgotten forever. Her name was Marenza Volk, though no one on Linden Row had ever heard that name. To the bakery, she was Mara. To the post office, she was Mara Holst, a name she had taken from a headstone in a cemetery 2 towns over because she had read somewhere that the dead made the safest borrowers. To her daughter, she was simply Mama, which was the only name that had ever felt entirely true. She was 31 years old. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, cut short at the shoulders because long hair was easier to grab, and she had learned that lesson once and never forgotten it. Her eyes were gray, the color of weather, and they had a habit of moving from door to door again without her seeming to notice she was doing it. There was a small white scar above her left eyebrow that she covered with a piece of hair when she remembered, and a longer one along the inside of her right wrist that she covered with a leather cord she had braided herself. She wore a wool cardigan the color of moss over a gray dress that had been washed soft. Her shoes were brown leather, scuffed at the toes. Everything she owned could fit inside a single canvas bag, and she kept that bag packed at all times, beneath the bed, with the zipper closed and the strap turned outward, ready. Her daughter was called Inca, a name Marenza had chosen the night the child was born, alone, in a small white room above a tailor's shop 200 miles from this bakery, with a midwife who had not asked for a surname. Inca was 4 years and 3 months old. She had her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair, and a small dimple in her left cheek that appeared only when she was about to say something she knew she should not say. Every morning, Marenza braided Inca's hair before they left the small flat above the laundromat where they lived. She did it in 2 plaits, with a piece of green ribbon at the end of each one, because Inca liked green. She did it even on the mornings when her own hands were shaking. She did it because it was the one thing in her life that no one had ever taken from her. The small daily ritual of caring for her child with her own 2 hands, and she had decided long ago that whatever else the world stripped away, this would not be on the list. She had €1,140 in a tin box hidden inside the loose floorboard beneath the kitchen sink. She had a small folding knife in the inner pocket of her coat. She had bus schedules memorized for 3 different routes leaving West Haven. She had a plan for if. She had a plan for when. She had a plan for everything except the one thing that had just happened, which was that the man she had spent 5 years pretending was dead had stopped walking on the other side of Linden Row and was now looking through the bakery window at the daughter he did not know existed. Inca tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she said again, "the man is still there." Marenza did not turn her head. She had trained herself over 5 years, never to react visibly, never to give the world the satisfaction of seeing her startled. She lifted her teacup with both hands and brought it to her lips and did not drink. Her eyes shifted to the window only after a count of 3. He was still there, older than she remembered. Or perhaps not older, only tireder. The way men become tireder when they have spent 5 years carrying something they could not put down. The black overcoat was the same. The silver ring on his right hand was the same. The way he stood, perfectly still, with his weight slightly forward, as if the world were always about to require something of him, was the same. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. She had rehearsed the lines. She had memorized the exits. She had prepared. And now that it was here, she discovered that none of it mattered, because she was not afraid. Not the way she had been afraid 5 years ago. Something in her had changed, and she did not yet know what it was, only that her hands were steady around the teacup, and her daughter was beside her, and the bakery was warm, and the man across the street was the one who would have to decide what came next, not her. She set the cup down. She tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind the girl's ear with a hand that did not tremble. "Finish your bread," she said quietly. "We're leaving in 2 minutes." She did not look at him again as she stood. She placed a small coin on the table for the tea, took Inca's hand, and walked her daughter to the back of the bakery, past the counter, past Pavel Brennick, who looked up from the dough he was shaping and did not ask. There was a service door behind the kitchen that opened onto an alley between the bakery and the old print shop next door. Marenza had walked through it twice a week for 11 months, learning the route, memorizing every loose brick and every drain pipe and every angle that would take her out of sight in under 9 seconds. She had not chosen this bakery for its bread. She lifted Inca onto her hip and walked east. The girl did not ask why. Inca had been born already understanding that there were mornings when her mother did not explain, and you simply held on. They reached the small flat above the laundromat in 7 minutes. Marenza set Inca on the kitchen chair, took the canvas bag from beneath the bed, checked the zipper, and sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, because that was what she did when her legs would no longer hold her standing. She closed her eyes. The man's name was Dmitry Roselov, and once, a long time ago, in a city she had not allowed herself to speak aloud in 5 years, she had stood at an altar in a white dress and promised to spend her life with him. She had been 23 years old. He had been 31. She had not known then what kind of man he was. She had known only that he was beautiful, in the cold and certain way that powerful men are beautiful, and that when he looked at her as if no one else in the room existed. It had taken her 8 months to learn what the silver ring on his right hand meant. It had taken her another year to learn what his family did. It had taken another year to understand that the things he had told her on the night he proposed had been the most carefully constructed lie of his entire life. She had not minded the wealth. She had minded, eventually, the men who came to the door at midnight. The phone calls in languages she did not understand. The nights he came home with someone else's blood on his cuffs and put the shirt into a fire she was not allowed to question. She had minded the slow understanding that the house by the water was not a promise, but a cage with a beautiful view. Still, she had stayed, because she had loved him, and because love, when it is built on a lie, is the hardest thing in the world to set down. What had ended it had not been the violence she had learned to fold around like water around a stone. What had ended it had been the woman. Her name had been Selvine Arquette. She had appeared at a dinner one evening in early spring, the daughter of a family that had done business with Dimitri's for 2 generations, and Marenza had known the moment Dmitri introduced her, with that particular flatness in his voice that he used when he was lying, that something had already begun. The conversation had happened on a Sunday morning in a sunroom that overlooked the garden where Marenza had planted lavender 3 summers earlier. Dmitri had not raised his voice. He had not been cruel. He had simply explained, in the calm and reasonable tone of a man arranging the furniture in a room, that the marriage had served its purpose, that Selvine was more suited to the next stage of his life, and that arrangements would be made. She had asked him, quietly, what arrangements meant. He had smiled, the kind of smile that, if you had ever loved him, would tell you everything you needed to know about why you should never love him again. "We've discussed it," he had said. "The family has discussed it. It will be handled with care." She had understood then the precise shape of what he was offering. Not a divorce, a tidy ending, the kind his family was very good at arranging. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had nodded once, the way a woman nods at a man who has just told her the weather forecast, and she had said, "Of course, Dmitri, whatever you think is best." And then she had stood up, walked out of the sunroom, and packed a single canvas bag. She had also packed something she had only recently confirmed and had not yet told him. The pregnancy test was 3 days old. She had folded the result into a piece of tissue paper, slipped it into the bottom of the bag, and walked back to the car as if she had only stopped for a sandwich. She had left that night with 1,100 euros in cash, a forged set of identification papers, and the unborn child Dmitry Roselov did not know about. She had been told 2 months later, by a contact she still trusted, that Dmitry had been informed she was dead. A car accident on a coastal road. Body unrecovered. The story had been clean, and the family had accepted it, because a dead first wife was a tidier thing than a missing one, and Selvine had moved into the house by the water before the lavender had finished blooming. Marenza had built her life out of that lie, 5 years of it. A small flat, a bakery job, a daughter with gray eyes and a dimple in her left cheek. And now Dmitry Roselov was standing on Linden Row, and the lie was over. She opened her eyes. Inka was standing in front of her, holding the small wooden rabbit that had belonged to her since she was 11 months old, the one with the chipped ear. "Mama," the girl said softly, "are we hiding the bag again?" Marenza looked at her daughter for a long moment without answering. Inka was still holding the rabbit. The rabbit's name was Bunno, which had been the first word Inca had said that was not mama, and the rabbit had not been more than 3 feet from the child since. Marenza took the small wooden creature gently from her daughter's hand, the chipped ear, the faded blue ribbon around its neck, the small smudge of blue ink on its belly from when Inca had tried to write her own name on it last spring. She handed the rabbit back. "Sit on the bed for me, sweetheart. I need to think." Inca sat. She had been good at being still since she was very small, the way children become good at being still when they have learned that stillness is sometimes the price of safety. She held Bruno against her chest and watched her mother with gray eyes that were too patient for a 4-year-old to have. "Mama," Inca said. Marenza did not answer. "Mama," the girl said again, softer this time. "Was the man my papa?" The room went very quiet. The radiator under the window made its small ticking sound. A truck passed on the street below. Marenza had prepared, over 5 years, for almost every question her daughter might one day ask. She had answers for where is my papa, and why don't I have a papa, and is my papa coming home? She did not have an answer for this one, because this one was not a question. This one was a knowing. Inca had never seen Dmitry Rosalov in her life. Marenza had been careful, more than careful, and ruthless about that. The old phone Inca had mentioned in the bakery had been broken for 2 years, and the photograph the girl had once seen on it, when she was barely 2, had been the only one Marenza had ever allowed her to see, and only by accident. Only for the 3 seconds it had taken to wrench the phone away and put it on a shelf the child could not reach. But Inca had remembered. Of course she had remembered. Children remember the things adults are most desperate for them to forget. "How you knew," Marenza said quietly. Inca considered the question with the seriousness of a small child who knows she is being trusted with something heavy. "Because his eyes are sad," she said. "Like yours when you don't think I'm looking." Marenza closed her eyes. She put her hand over her mouth, because some sounds are not sounds you can make in front of your child, and she stayed that way for a long count. "Get your coat," she said. "We're going to the station." But Inca did not move. She held Bruno against her chest, and she looked at her mother with an expression Marenza had never seen on her face before, an expression that was not fear, and not confusion, and not childishness. "Mama," Inca said. "I'm tired of running." He had not moved from the doorway of the flower shop. His name was Ksaveri Halverson, and he had been Dmitry Rosalov's driver for 11 years, which was a number that meant something in their world, because 11 years in proximity to a man like Dmitry was either a sentence or a privilege, and Ksaveri had never been entirely certain which one his had been. He was 48 years old. He had gray hair cut very short and a face that had been broken twice in his 20s and had healed into something that did not quite belong on a man who drove a car for a living. He had not been walking past the bakery by accident. Dmitry had sent him to Westhaven 3 days earlier on what he had been told was routine business. He had finished the meeting the previous evening. He had been due to drive back to the city this morning. And then, walking past a bakery on a street he had no reason to be walking down, he had seen, through the rain-streaked window, a woman drinking tea with a small girl, and his whole life had stopped. Because Ksaveri Halverson knew exactly who Marenza Volk was, he had driven her, in the years when she had been the wife, on 100 quiet errands. He had carried her shopping bags. He had watched her, in his rear-view mirror, on the long afternoon drives between the city and the house by the water, when she had thought she was alone and had let her face do the thing faces do when no one is watching. He had also been the man who, 5 years earlier, had been instructed to drive a different car along a different coastal road and to file a different report. He had been the man who had told Dmitry Rosalov that the wreckage had been searched and that the body had not been recovered. He had lied. He had let her go. He had been the one piece of the family's machinery that had refused, that one time, to do the thing the family required. He had not seen her since. He had not searched for her. The not knowing had been a kindness he had been giving himself, because 11 years in proximity to Dmitry Rosalov had taught him that the only things in this world a man like him was permitted to keep were the things no one else knew he had. And now she was sitting in a bakery on Linden Row with a child who looked, from this distance, exactly the right age. He had stopped walking because his legs had stopped agreeing to carry him. He had watched the woman lift her teacup with both hands, in the precise way she had always lifted things when she was afraid, and he had understood, in that single gesture, that she had seen him, that she had recognized him, and that she was now performing, for the benefit of the bakery and the street and the rain, the calm of a woman who had not just looked through a window and found her past standing in it. He had seen her stand. He had seen her take the child's hand. He had seen them disappear toward the back of the bakery. He had not followed. His own mother's name had been Aniela Halverson. She had raised him alone, in a small mining town 300 miles to the north, in a 2-room house with a coal stove. His father had been a man who came and went, and when he came drunk, and when he was drunk, he hit. And Aniela had taken every blow with the same flat stillness Xari had later recognized in Marenza, in the rearview mirror, on the long afternoon drives. His mother had died when he was 19, of nothing in particular, and everything at once. Xari had left the mining town the week of the funeral and had never gone back. He had taken work where it was offered. He had eventually been offered work by a family whose business he had understood only partially, and by the time he had understood it fully, leaving was no longer a thing a man like him was permitted to do. The lie he had told about Marenza 5 years ago had been the only piece of himself he still owned outright. He was not yet finished spending it. He stepped out of the flower shop doorway. He turned and walked east, slowly, deliberately, at the pace of a man who needed, very badly, to find a way to tell her one thing before he disappeared from her life again. The thing he needed to tell her was that Dmitry Rosalov did not know she was alive, yet. But that something had changed, 3 weeks earlier, and that Dmitry had begun, very quietly, to ask questions about a death certificate that had never been filed. Marenza did not go to the station. She had stood in the kitchen of the small flat for a long minute after Inka had said the words, "I'm tired of running." And she had felt the floor of her plan, the careful architecture of 5 years, begin to give way beneath her feet. Not all at once, but in the way old wood gives way. A small, soft surrender that promises a larger one to come. She had looked at her daughter and understood, in the way mothers understand things they would prefer not to understand, that Inka was right. So she did not go to the station. She unpacked the canvas bag. She took the kettle off the stove. She sat down at the kitchen table and placed her hands flat on the wood, and she waited for her own breathing to tell her what to do next. Inka climbed into the chair opposite her. She placed Bruno on the table between them, sitting upright, as if the rabbit were a third person at the meeting. The knock came 40 minutes later. It was a soft knock. 2 short, 1 long, then a pause, then 1 more short. The knock of a man who had thought carefully about what kind of knock would not frighten the woman behind the door. Marenza looked at Inka. She held a finger to her lips. Inka nodded with the seriousness of a small soldier given an order she did not need explained. Marenza walked silently to the front door. She did not look through the peephole, because she had learned, long ago, that peepholes worked both ways, and that a man who knew you were watching could time his next move to the second your eye left the glass. She pressed her ear to the wood and listened. She heard breathing. 1 person. Heavy, but slow. Tired. "Mrs. Volk," the voice said, very quietly, on the other side of the door. "It is Xawari." She closed her eyes. She had not heard that voice in 5 years, but it came back to her now whole and unchanged, the slight roughness at the edges of his vowels, the way he placed her name as if he were setting down something that did not belong to him. I am alone, the voice said. I have not told anyone. I will not tell anyone. I am asking you to let me speak to you for 5 minutes, and then I will leave, and you will not see me again. If you do not open the door, I will leave now. The choice is yours. She stood with her forehead against the wood and her hand on the chain. Why are you here? She said. Because 3 weeks ago, the voice said. He stopped believing the story. And because if I do not tell you what is happening, you will not know that you need to leave West Haven before Friday. You can do what you want with the information, but you should have it. She thought about Inca in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a wooden rabbit, saying she was tired of running. She thought about the look on Xari Halverson's face, the one time she had caught him watching her in the rearview mirror on a long drive home in the dark, and had understood that he had seen her for what she was, and had not used it, and had not spoken of it, and had simply kept driving. She slid the chain. She unlocked the bolt. She opened the door 6 inches and looked at him through the gap. He looked older. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. His hands were visible at his sides, palms turned slightly outward, signaling that he was not reaching. I will speak to you in the bakery, she said. Not here. Not where my daughter is. He nodded. I will wait downstairs. She closed the door. She locked it. Then she walked back to the kitchen, and she knelt in front of her daughter's chair so that her face was level with Inca's. Listen to me, she said. I need you to do something very brave for me. I need you to go next door to Mrs. Pemberley and ask her if you can sit in her kitchen for 1 hour. Take Bruno, lock the door behind you when she opens it. Don't come back here until I come and get you. Mama, the girl said, are you going to talk to the man with the sad eyes? No, I am going to talk to a different man. A man who used to drive cars for the man with the sad eyes. He came to tell me something important. Will you come back? Marenza took her daughter's small face in both hands. I will always come back. Always. Do you hear me? Inca nodded once. She picked up Bruno. She walked across the hall to the door of the elderly woman who had been the closest thing to a friend Marenza had allowed herself in 5 years, and she knocked 3 times, evenly. Mrs. Pemberley opened the door, looked at the child, looked at Marenza standing in her own doorway, and asked no questions. Marenza waited until the door closed. She waited until she heard the bolt slide. Then she walked downstairs. The bakery was emptier now. The morning rush had passed. The rain had stopped, and the round table by the window was free. Xari Halverson was sitting at it. He had ordered nothing. He sat with his hands folded in front of him, and his black overcoat folded over the chair beside him, and a small silver cigarette lighter on the table that he was not using, that he had simply set down in front of him the way some men set down a weapon to show that they have one, but are not going to need it. Marenza sat across from him. She did not greet him. She placed her own hands on the table mirroring his, although she did not know she was doing it. Tell me, she said. Xari looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. Not at the woman across the table, at the woman he had driven, 11 years ago, on her wedding day. At the woman he had told a single, careful lie for, 5 years ago, on a coastal road, with a wreckage that had not been searched as thoroughly as he had reported. 3 weeks ago, he said, Selvine lost a child. Marenza did not move. It was the second one she had lost. Dimitri does not handle losing things well. He took the second one harder than the first. He drank for 9 days. On the 9th night, he came into the kitchen of the house by the water, sat down at the table where you used to sit, and said something I had not heard him say in 5 years. What? Marenza said. He said he had been thinking about you. He said that the story had always bothered him, in a small way, in the part of him he did not let himself listen to. He said that he wanted to see the body. Marenza closed her eyes. I told him there had not been a body. He said he knew that. He said he wanted to see the report. The original one, the one I had filed. And I had filed a report, Mrs. Volk. I had filed it the day after carefully, with the right names and signatures and photographs of a wreckage that did exist. The report was clean. It is still clean. I let him read it. He read it 3 times. He folded it. He put it back in the file. And then he asked me a question I have been waiting 5 years for him to ask. What question? Marenza said. He asked me whether I had personally seen the car go into the water. I told him no, but that the timing of the report and the location of the wreckage and the absence of any other vehicle in the area had led the local authorities to conclude, with a degree of certainty that satisfied the family at the time, that the driver had not survived. He listened. He nodded. And he said, very quietly, that he was going to begin asking some questions, in his own time, in his own way, and that he would appreciate my full cooperation. Marenza opened her eyes. How long I have, she said. Until Friday. He has hired a man, a private one, from outside the family. The man has been working for 10 days. I do not know what he has found, but I know that 2 days ago he requested a list of every small town within a 4-hour radius of the coastal road that has a registry office not requiring photographic identification. West Haven is on that list. There are 11 other towns on it. He will not get to West Haven first, but he will get to it. The bakery was very quiet. Marenza looked at the silver lighter. She looked at her own hands, which were not shaking, which had not shaken in 5 years, which she had trained, by sheer force of will, into a stillness that was not the same as calm. Why you are telling me this, she said. Xari was silent for a long moment. Because my mother's name was Aniela, he said. Marenza looked up. She raised me alone, he said. My father drank, and when he drank, he hit. And she took it. The way I watched you take things you should not have had to take. She died when I was 19. The doctor said it was her heart. I have never believed that. I believe she was simply finished. I have spent 29 years driving cars for men whose work I do not respect, because I told myself there was a difference between the man who carried the bags and the man who gave the orders, and that difference, however small, was the only thing I still owned. 5 years ago, I spent a piece of it. I am here today to spend the rest. He pushed the silver lighter across the table toward her. This is not a gift, he said. It is a number. There is a name engraved on the bottom. The name is a woman in a city 400 miles south of here. She runs a network that has been moving women like you for 30 years. She is not connected to any family. She does not take payment. If you go to her, she will not ask your name. She will move you and your daughter through 3 countries in 11 days. At the end of those 11 days, you will not exist on any list Dmitry Rosolov can buy. Marenza looked at the lighter. She did not pick it up. What about Inka? She said. Xari's face changed. Only slightly. Only for a moment. But she saw it. I saw her this morning, he said. Through the window. She has his hair. She has your eyes. She has a small dimple in her left cheek. And it is hers. And it is yours now. And it does not belong to him. He paused. He must never know she exists, Mrs. Volk. Never. Not for any reason. Not ever. Do you understand what I am telling you? Marenza picked up the lighter. She turned it over. The engraving on the bottom was small, careful, and had been done a long time ago. A woman's name. A telephone number. Nothing else. She closed her hand around it. I understand, she said. Xari did not stay. He did not offer her any further reassurance, because reassurance was a currency he did not own. He stood up. He folded his black overcoat over his arm. He looked at her for a long, last moment, with the kind of look that was the closest thing to goodbye that men of his profession were permitted to give, and he left the bakery. She watched him through the window. He walked east and turned the corner at the end of Linden Row the way men turn corners when they are choosing, with their last small piece of themselves, to go somewhere they have never been. Marenza did not seek Saori Halverson again. She would learn, 11 months later, through a quiet message left on a quiet line, that he had not returned to the city. That he had stopped, instead, in a small town 200 miles to the south, taken a job at a service station, and begun, at the age of 48, the long and uncertain work of becoming a man who no longer carried bags. She would learn this, but not yet. Now, she sat at the round table for another 9 minutes, with the silver lighter closed inside her fist. She did the thing she had trained herself over 5 years to do when the floor of her plan gave way. She rebuilt it, quickly, quietly, without panic. She walked back to the flat. She knocked on Mrs. Pemberley's door. Inca was sitting at the elderly woman's kitchen table, eating buttered toast cut into 4 small triangles and drawing something on the back of an old envelope with a green crayon. Marenza knelt beside her daughter's chair. "Are you all right?" Inca nodded without looking away from the envelope. "Are we leaving?" "Yes. But not the way we usually leave. This time we are going somewhere far. And we are not coming back." Inca set down the green crayon. She turned very slowly in her chair and looked at her mother with the same expression she had worn that morning, the one that was not fear and not confusion and not childishness, but was, Marenza understood now, recognition. "Okay, Mama," the girl said. That was all. 2 words. The 2 smallest, hardest, most adult words a 4-year-old can say. Marenza thanked Mrs. Pemberley, who waved the thanks away with the back of one hand. She took Inca's hand. She walked her daughter back across the hallway. She closed the door behind them. She did not pack the canvas bag. She had decided, in the 9 minutes at the bakery window, that the canvas bag was a bag for a woman running from one small town to another. It was not a bag for a woman crossing 3 countries in 11 days. It would stay where it had been. Instead, she pulled a different bag from a place even Inca did not know about. A soft leather satchel hidden inside a hollowed section of the wall behind the bedroom radiator, which she had cut 2.5 years earlier with a small kitchen knife and a great deal of patience, and which she had told no one about, because the only safe hiding place is the one you have not described aloud. The satchel held a second set of identification papers, more recent, more carefully forged. A small photograph of her own mother, taken when her mother was 20 and laughing. 3,000 euros in different currencies, divided across 4 envelopes. A second small folding knife, a child's passport, in a name that was not Inca's name, but was close enough that the girl would learn to answer to it within a week. And a single object she had not let herself look at in 5 years. A silver chain with a small plain pendant that Dmitry Rosilov had given her on the morning of their wedding, before either of them had said any of the things that had eventually become true. She took the chain in her hand. She had not been able to throw it away in 5 years, although she had tried, twice. There was something in it she had not been able to set down. Not the love. The love had set itself down a long time ago. Something else. The proof, perhaps, that she had once been a woman young enough to believe a man like that, and that the woman who had believed him had not been stupid, only young. Only the kind of woman who had not yet learned the names of the things that lived inside her own house. She closed her hand around the chain. Then she walked to the kitchen sink, lifted the loose floorboard, took the tin box, opened it, and placed the silver chain inside, on top of the 1,140 euros. She closed the lid. She did not take the chain with her. She took the tin box to the kitchen window, the one that opened onto the inner courtyard. She leaned out. She pulled up the loose brick at the base of the fire escape, placed the tin box in the small hollow beneath it, set the brick back, closed the window, and locked it. The chain would stay in West Haven. The young woman who had believed him would stay, in a tin box, beneath a brick, on a street that had kept her safe for 11 months, and that she was now choosing to leave behind, not as a fugitive, but as a woman who had finished the part of her life that had needed to hide. She picked up Inca. She picked up the leather satchel. She picked up the silver lighter. And she walked out of the small flat above the laundromat for the last time at 2 in the afternoon, on a Tuesday in late October, with her daughter in her arms and a telephone number in her pocket, and a plan that was no longer an old plan, but a new one, that she was building, step by step, out of the things she still had left. The train left West Haven at 4:17 in the afternoon. Marenza sat by the window with Inca asleep against her shoulder, the leather satchel between her feet, the silver lighter closed inside her right hand. The carriage was nearly empty. The countryside outside was the color of an old photograph, brown fields and gray sky, and the small bare trees that lined the railway like a thin pencil drawing. She thought about Xari, about the way he had pushed the lighter across the table without ceremony, about his mother, Aniela, who had died at 43 because the body, when it has been asked to carry too much, simply sets the weight down. About the years he had spent driving cars for a man whose work he did not respect, and how he had spent the last of his small difference for her, twice now, 5 years apart, without ever asking to be thanked. She thought about her own mother, who had also died young, in a small apartment in a city Marenza no longer let herself remember, when Marenza had been 17. She thought about the way her mother had once told her, on a winter afternoon, that the only freedom a woman ever truly owned was the freedom to walk away from a room she should not be in. Marenza had not understood then what her mother had meant. She had been 17. She had not yet learned the rooms. She understood now. She looked down at Inca, sleeping against her, and pressed her lips very softly against the top of the girl's head, and said, into her daughter's hair, the words she had not let herself say aloud in 5 years. "I am not running anymore," she said. "I am going." The difference was very small. The difference was everything. The 11 days were not gentle. There were 3 trains, and 2 long bus rides through countryside Marenza did not recognize, and 1 slow ferry across a stretch of gray water at 3 in the morning, with Inca asleep on her lap. There was a woman named Halisa Drevin, who met them at a small station in a city Marenza had never been to, who did not ask their names, who fed them soup in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and old paper, and who looked at Inca for a long moment and said, in a voice that carried no pity, only recognition, "She has good eyes. This one. She will be all right." There were borders crossed at strange hours. There were nights spent in rooms above shops whose owners did not turn on the hall light. There was a small green notebook Halise pressed into Marenza's hand on the 7th evening, with 3 names written inside, that Halise made her practice aloud until the syllables came out clean. On the 11th day, just after dawn, they arrived. There was a quiet apartment above a tailor's shop, in a town near the coast of a country whose language Marenza was still learning, with whitewashed walls and a small balcony that looked over a square where the children played in the late afternoons. There was a new name on the door. There were new papers in a drawer. There was a small school 3 streets away that took children from the age of 4, and a woman at that school who, on Inca's first day, knelt down to the girl's level and said welcome, in a voice that had nothing in it the girl had ever needed to be afraid of. There was the slow, careful work of becoming someone who was no longer waiting. Marenza found work in a bookshop on a side street, run by an elderly couple who paid her in cash for the first 3 months, and then, when they understood that she was going to stay, in proper wages. She learned to shelve in a new alphabet. She learned to greet customers in 3 new phrases. She learned the names of the streets, the names of the trees, and the name of the small white flower that grew between the cobblestones of the square in spring. Inca grew. She lost the dimple in her left cheek, briefly, and when it came back, 6 months later, it came back attached to a different kind of smile, a smile that had no second layer to it. No part held in reserve, no part listening for a door. She made a friend at the school, a small dark-haired boy named Tobias, and the two children walked home together every afternoon down a street lined with lemon trees. Marenza watched her daughter make that friend. She watched Inca run. She watched Inca shout, in a voice that had nothing careful in it, across the square. And she stood on the small balcony and put her hand against her own chest and felt, for the first time in 5 years and 7 months, the small, slow unclenching of something that had been held shut for so long it had forgotten the shape of being open. She cried that evening. Real crying, the kind that comes from the bottom of a thing that has been pressed down so long it forgot it was a thing. Inca found her on the balcony and did not ask. She climbed into her mother's lap, put her small head against her mother's shoulder, and stayed there until the crying was finished, the way a child stays when she has understood, without being told, that some tears are not a problem to be solved, but a weight finally being put down. Bruno survived the 11 days. Bruno survived the new apartment. Bruno survived the first day of school, and the second, and the 100th, and was eventually placed by Inca herself on a shelf above the girl's bed, with the chipped ear turned outward, in the position of an old soldier who had earned his retirement and was now permitted to watch the room from a height. Marenza did not throw away the silver lighter Xari had given her. She kept it in a small wooden box on her dresser beside her mother's photograph. On the nights when sleep was difficult, which were fewer now but not yet none, she would take it out and turn it over in her hand, and think of the man who had given it to her, and of the long, thin chain of small refusals that had carried her, in the end, to a balcony above a tailor's shop in a town she could now call by its right name. The years passed. The bookshop stayed quiet. The lemon trees flowered every spring and dropped their petals every May. None of the neighbors ever asked her where she had come from. They asked her instead whether the rain would come early this year, and whether Inca had grown another inch, which she always had. In the 3rd year, on a Saturday morning in late spring, Inca, who was now 7, looked up from her bread and honey and asked a question she had never asked before. "Mama," the girl said, "are you happy?" Marenza set down the cup she had been holding. She thought about it for a long time, the way a person thinks about a word in a language they are still learning, turning it over, and testing the weight of it. "Yes," she said, finally, "I am." Inca nodded, the way she always nodded when her mother told her something she had already known, and went back to her bread and honey, and the morning continued. And the lemon trees outside the window kept dropping their small white petals onto the cobblestones of a square in a town Dmitry Rosalov would never find. 6 years after the morning at the bakery on Linden Row, on a Sunday afternoon in October, a woman named Nora Hessen, which was the name on her current papers and the name her daughter answered to in the playground, walked along a stone path beside the sea with her 10-year-old daughter and stopped at a small white bench overlooking the water. The wind was soft. The light on the sea was the kind of light that only exists in places that have decided to be quiet. A few gulls turned slowly overhead, and the air smelled of salt and rosemary, and the path behind them was empty except for an elderly man walking a small gray dog who passed them without looking up. Inca, who was now 10, and who had her mother's gray eyes and her own laugh, and a small dimple in her left cheek that had become permanent, sat down on the bench beside her mother and pulled a small folded square of paper out of her coat pocket. "I made you something," she said. She unfolded the paper. It was a drawing. A house with a balcony, 2 figures on the balcony, a tree in the square below, and at the top of the page, in careful round handwriting, the single word us. Marenza took the drawing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and put it inside the inner pocket of her coat, against her chest, where she had once, a long time ago, on a different morning in a different country, kept a folded piece of tissue paper with the result of a pregnancy test inside it. She did not say anything for a while. She did not need to. Inca leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. The gulls turned. The light moved on the water. Across a sea, in a house by a different water, a man with gray at his temples and a silver ring on his right hand stood at a window and watched a younger woman with dark hair and a sharp jaw walk across a garden where lavender had once grown and no longer did. He had stopped, 2 years earlier, asking the questions about the death certificate. He had stopped, 8 months earlier, paying the man he had hired. He had not found her. He would not find her. He would die, eventually, in that house, of the slow, private illness that was already beginning to settle into him, and he would die without ever knowing that across a stretch of water he had never crossed, a girl with his hair and her mother's eyes was, at that very moment, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder on a white bench, in a life he had never been allowed to enter. Marenza did not turn her head. Turning her head was for women who were not certain. And Marenza Volk, who had once been a wife in a beautiful cage, who had once carried a folded piece of tissue paper in the inner pocket of her coat, who had once sat in a bakery on Linden Road drinking tea that was no longer warm, was certain. She had not been rescued. She had been recognized. Once, by a man named Xari Halverson, who had spent the last small piece of his difference for her. Once by a 4-year-old girl with a wooden rabbit who had told her on a Tuesday afternoon that she was tired of running, and once, finally, by herself. The wind shifted. Inca's hair lifted against her mother's cheek. The sea kept arriving. Somewhere far inland, in a town called West Haven, on a street called Linden Row, in the small hollow beneath a loose brick at the base of a fire escape, a tin box still sat, holding 1,140 euros and a silver chain on which a younger woman had once placed all of her hope. The box had not been opened in 6 years. It would not be opened again. Some things stay where they are placed. Some women keep walking. And on a white bench, above a sea, in a country she had built by hand, Marenza closed her eyes against the soft wind and held her daughter, and let the morning be what it was, which was hers.